What bothers you about the name?
The history of the name. It at one time had a variant of Negro, which we all know what that is, and it was changed in the '60s because Lady Bird Johnson didn't like it, and that was a good gesture on the part of our government at the time. But in the year 2012 or in the 21st century, I think it's time for us to move forward and put the name Grand Staff Canyon to the canyon and a story about the gentleman. He came along 20 years after the first settlers came here, and they had abandoned, the first settlers had abandoned a fort that they built because they had troubles with the Native Americans, and they had left. And so 20 years later or so, Grand Staff and another gentleman, nobody knows his real name, called Frenchie, came along and took over the fort, found cattle that belonged to some of the ranchers that had abandoned the area or left the area or had been killed, and took the cattle and took them 3 miles up a river away from where they were to this place that we now know as Negro Bill Canyon.
What do you think about this canyon?
I think it's beautiful. It's our first time here. We were just passing through Moab on business and had the morning free, so we wanted to go explore somewhere that was also dog friendly, since we have a little pooch with us. So it was our first time and it was beautiful. I love the bridge at the end. It's like getting to see an arch without going to arches. We definitely found the name a little alarming when we first read about it this morning. Just thought, like, that's a weird name, but if anything, it kind of enticed us to read about it and understand why it was called Negro Bill. So I think if they changed it to Grand Staff Canyon, maybe that would be a little more respectful. So I mean, either way, I think it's a beautiful canyon, and I think it's great that he has it as his namesake, but if people felt it was more respectful to drop Negro, then I think it's great.
I think it should be changed. I think the name is, I think it's outdated, and I think to change the name it's a sign of the times, and I think we need to be more respectful, and I think it's borderline inappropriate, the name, so I think it should be changed.
The local historians have named him a renegade, and other places that he lived portrayed him as a beloved citizen. So I guess it just depends on who you ask. I gather that he was a very religious man, a very industrious man. He owned a lot of things, and he had a lot of transactions, and apparently he had a lot of friends. So I'd say he was probably a good person. He was here from 1877 to 1881. He left supposedly because there was a massacre of some settlers by the Native Americans. It was said that William Grandstaff sold whiskey to the Native Americans. And so there was one point where the settlers were supposedly rounding up guns and gathering themselves up, and William got word of this and decided, well, you know, I think I'm the Indian that they're really looking for, so I'm gonna leave. So he left and headed east to Colorado. The records show he went to Glenwood Springs first, then to Leadville, Colorado, where he was noted as nominated to run for constable in Leadville in 1889. He left there, went back to Glenwood Springs, had several claims and properties in Glenwood Springs. He owned a tavern. It was called the Grand Staff Landing. He owned it for a short period of time, sold it, made a $75 profit on it, and He lived in Glenwood Springs, had a house in Glenwood Springs that he didn't live in because he preferred to live up on a mountain called Red Mountain. He was a bit of a loner. He had prospects on Red Mountain, so that was the other reason he had a cabin there. And that's where he was found dead. A town kid was sent up to look for him because he hadn't been down in town to pick up provisions in a while, and the people were worried about him. They knew he had been ill. And when they found him, they gave him a burial. And newspaper articles in Colorado portrayed him as a good old fellow, and they gave him a proper burial and had a pretty good, heartfelt story about William Grandstaff and how much they respected him. When looking at his history and looking at all of the paperwork and records that show transactions of business and newspaper articles about him, nowhere did I find any reference to the term that is now used here in Moab. So my point basically is that I don't think he introduced himself that way. And I know that that's not the way that his parents named him. And all the other settlers in this area have got the respect of their given names. And I don't think we should be giving a moniker to a man that was the first or one of the first settlers to be here. And apparently one of the few that could have diplomacy with the Native Americans. Hopefully, we can get our community to understand some of the points of this petition and to honor, William Grandstaff. I think he was, one of our first pioneers, and we should give him some respect.